ago, and we talked about this. So some of it might be familiar to a few of you, but there's new stuff. There's always new stuff going on. So, like new people. So happy to have you. Let me turn off my phone.
Susan, you can always repeat things.
That's
our forgetteries are really happening.
Yeah. Even when I was rereading it, all my notes and everything, I said, "Oh yeah, you forget. Even when you're the teacher, you don't always remember everything." So I'll wait one more minute and then we'll begin. Anyone who wants to show themselves, I invite you to do so because it's more fun to see you and then have you participate or contribute. Okay. We have a nice group. Very nice. We have 22 people. That's lovely. So, hi everyone. I'd like to start with a blessing, a Torah study blessing. So if you'd like to join me, you can. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher tishanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, to engage in the words of Torah. Torah literally means teaching, so it's any Jewish study can be considered Torah. So the first thing I want to talk about is, would the rabbis approve of the Bachelorette, the show, which is like a woman looking for suitors and having a lot of people pursue her? More people, I'm admitting them. And in a way, yes, but not exactly in the same way, because in ancient Israel, there was this holiday that sort of was one of these matchmaking events, which was called Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. Av is a month, a Hebrew month. It's in the summer. And it was the time when in ancient Israel, when all the young girls, the unmarried girls, would dress in white, and they would go outside of the walls of Jerusalem and they would dance and they would flirt, and all the young men would come out and watch them and pursue them. And it was kind of a time when you looked for a girlfriend and you looked for a boyfriend. And it says that there were these two times where they did it. One was on Tu B'Av in the middle of the summer, and the other time was Yom Kippur night. The night, like after the break the fast, that's when they would also go out and dance. And I wonder, it's so interesting because Yom Kippur, you contemplate your death, you contemplate your life, and then immediately all the young people go out and they try to find partners. And my father growing up used to tell me that when he was in his 20s, they would always go to a Yom Kippur dance. That night, there would be a big dance for all the Jewish girls and guys. And I wonder, if the tradition came from this Torah, this Talmudic teaching, where it said, never was there more joyous time than on Tu B'Av and on Yom Kippur night, when the girls would go out and dance. And they would all wear white. And the rabbis say that the rich girls, they all wore sort of the similar white, simple dresses. So the rich girls and the poor girls wouldn't be in competition. So there was, or they would loan them dresses. So they all would go out, and it was this very happy time where courtship was happening, basically. So in that respect, I often think that, ancient Israel was a lot more free, a freer society than like ultra-Orthodox society, for sure, or society today, or in, during the 1800s and 1900s. It was, did you want to say something, Jeff? You're muted.
Oh, nothing to say. Just
okay.
To be
just
here.
saying hi.
That's all.
So
all the ladies.
Yeah, all the ladies. Actually, there's a couple men, but they're not showing themselves. They're intimidated.
Okay. Not me. I'm tough.
I know you are. I know you are.
Years. I have calluses everywhere.
Okay. So anyway, so that right away shows you that there was this kind of freewheeling attitude. It was, of course, sex was only approved of within the confines of marriage, but human beings are human beings, so we can assume that things happen anyway, even though they weren't approved. And actually, according to Talmudic law, if you have sex with someone, you're considered married. So you have to be careful, because that would be a way of being forced to marry the girl or the guy. Unless it was a rape, then there's other laws, of course. The act of the word love in Hebrew, love is very important in our tradition, in the Talmud, in the Torah, and in the prophets. And, oh, I know what I wanted to say. In the Song of Songs, one more thing. The Song of Songs is a highly erotic collection of 7 poems. It's in the Tanakh. It's in the book, the book of writings, in the section of the Bible called Writings, the Song of Songs. It was so erotic. It's about kissing and sex and body parts and sensuality, that the rabbis were not sure how they could include it, but it must have been so popular that they wanted to include it. And so they reinterpreted all of the sexual imagery as as a metaphor of love between God and the Jewish people. They said, oh, it's not really this young woman and this young man, it's God and the Jewish people. However, there's this quote in the Talmud where Rabbi Akiva, who loved this Song of Songs, he said it was the Holy of Holies of all the whole Bible, says, whoever sings or recites the Song of Songs in the taverns will be going, will forfeit the world to come. In other words, you won't go to heaven. It's a huge sin to recite the Song of Songs in taverns, which means they were singing it in the taverns, because they wouldn't say don't do it. I always say this, unless people were doing it a lot. So this song must have been a very, all these poems, they must have been singing them, reciting them in bars when people were drunk. So they were very sexy words. And in Jewish weddings, we actually use some of their words, like I am my beloved and my beloved is mine, and Nila do diva do li, that's from Song of Songs. And your kisses are sweeter than wine, that's from Song of Songs. And then it just, if you want to read something, I wrote my thesis on it. If you want to read something really beautiful and really erotic, read the Song of Songs. Anyway, so how do the rabbis view love? So I want your opinion before I teach you about it. What is your idea of what the ancient rabbis thought about love and sex? Do you have any opinions or preconceived notions? Joni, are you raising your hand?
I raised my hand a few minutes ago because I wanted to say that on Christmas Eve, we have something like they did in Talmudic days, where all the Jewish kids go to meet possible mates. And actually, my daughter met her husband at the Schmoozapalooza. It changes names, but it's done. It's still done in the Jewish community.
Well, they have parties.
But,
yeah.
Yeah, but I'm sorry. It was what I wanted to say a few minutes ago.
That's okay. Do you have a preconceived notion of how the rabbis viewed sex and love?
No.
Does anyone have take a guess? Jeff, and then Sue Casa.
Well, let's start with the word love in the Jewish sense. Love was something that developed after marriage, acquaintanceship, since marriages were arranged predominantly. And most of the time, the people really were unfamiliar totally with themselves as people. Love was a sense of regard that hopefully grew into more. And sex was more of a obligation in religious terms.
A duty.
It was a duty to accomplish.
Okay, well, that's interesting that you think that. Sue?
I was going to say pretty much the same thing, because if you see the program Stitzel, the parents arrange for the kids to meet, and they meet in some kind of a hotel, and and after one or two meetings, I guess they decide if the person's appropriate and a marriage is arranged. But they do say that sex is a mitzvah, especially on Shabbat.
Okay.
So, but I don't know if they associated what we term love with that sex.
Okay.
Because one of the commandments is you're supposed to procreate.
Right.
Grow fruitful
Okay.
and multiply.
Great. Anyone else? Merle and then
So-
Lori.
So
Merle?
to go along with what Susan just said, there's a hotel just over the Brooklyn Bridge. I don't remember what kind, but it's they have Orthodox date nights.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was there for Reform Jewish organization meetings several times. And it's also a hotel where Orthodox families have weddings. But it was very interesting. It was kind of like watching speed dating. They'd have all the tables lined up and they'd all sit at the tables, and there were rabbis that supervised it, and they set a timer, and then everybody had to move on to the next table at that point.
Oh,
Where it
That's
went
hilarious.
from there,
okay.
but
Okay.
we always found it interesting to watch, if we'd be there and we'd be in the Starbucks that was on the other side of it, we would watch what was going on and watch the facial body language as to their responses as to how they reacted to one another.
Okay. Lori?
Well, Rabbi Leader was last week on one of the things that I had been watching was saying that, in ancient times, if you look at the Bible, when it says, and she knew him, that actually meant that they were having intercourse.
Right.
And that before there were ceremonies for weddings, having sex for the first time was marriage.
Yes, I said that. That's
Oh, I'm
true.
sorry.
That's okay. Talia?
Hi. So you're asking rabbis' view on love
And sex.
and sex. Okay.
Ancient
So,
rabbis. Yeah.
pardon?
The ancient rabbis. Yeah.
Right. So I thought that women were property.
Mm-hmm.
So their view, in my opinion, was a way to control, shall we say, like hormones in a sense. It's like, because if we look at, like, I always go back to that play, Indecent, because even way back then, people have feelings. So even if a woman's property, she has feelings. A woman back then could have been a lesbian. And just because she was a rabbi's daughter even doesn't mean that but this whole setup the rabbis did seems like a way to control the outcome. So as far as their view on love, I agree that it's something that they hope will grow later, but I think that they disregard the true essence of love in terms of only knowing a love for God and discounting a love for humans between themselves.
Okay, so I want to move on because you're going to be shocked at how wrong you are. about
Great.
that.
Good.
And first of all, 19th century Ukrainian Jewish Hasidic custom is not the only way that Jews lived. That is one set that's been frozen in time, and Jews this is not the view of love. If you look in the Torah, Jacob fell madly in love with Rachel, kissed her on the mouth the minute he met her, and was besotted with her his entire life and never got over her death. And when she cried, "I don't have children," he said, "Why aren't I enough for you?" Because he just wanted to be her everything, even to the point of children. And King David had amazing lust and / love for Bathsheba, for Bathsheba. And the Song of Songs, as I told you, was written in, 400 BCE, is about the most juicy sexual desire you can imagine, describing breasts and thighs and buttocks and kisses and everything. And that Hasidic view, shtisel, that's just a slice. It's not all of Judaism, and we should not view Judaism through that lens. The first thing I want to say is, in the Jewish view of love, the word love is ahava, which means to give. And the rabbis said that giving is the most important part of love. And they're very specific about giving. And mainly it's the man giving to the woman and pleasing her as much as possible. Also, there's this beautiful midrash about love that says that our soulmates, our beshert, you know that word, you're intended, is chosen for us 40 days before we're born. That your soul is actually infused with this beshert, and right before you're born, it's cut in half and you're split, and you're looking for that soulmate, for that beshert. And when you meet him or her, I mean, doesn't say the gender, you cleave and you love. And this love is very important for a good relationship. Also, Rebecca and Isaac were in love too. Rabbi Leader likes to talk about Rebecca and Isaac because it says he married her and then he loved her. So he always says, shouldn't it be loved her and then married her? But I say, okay, that's because they brought her from far away and he had to marry her. But if you look at Rachel, he worked 7 years to marry her because he was so in love with her. And so we shouldn't think that real physical, emotional, passionate love does not exist.
I agree.
It says, also, sexual pleasure was so important that in the Torah, because a lot of this is in the Talmud, in the Torah, it says in the book of Deuteronomy, when a man has taken a bride, he shall not go out to the army or be assigned for any purpose. He shall be exempt for 1 year to stay, to be free at home, and bring happiness to the woman he married. And that happiness means sexual happiness and other kinds of happiness. So you could, even the most important thing, fighting for your country, your first year of marriage, you stayed home with your wife and you made her happy. So there's this sense of how important our relationship is. Yes, Jeff, you wanted to talk.
Susan?
What? And then Susan. First, Jeff, go ahead. You're muted.
One of the dictates early is that sex is totally under the control of the wife.
That's
that
right.
it's the male obligation to satisfy the wife's sexual desires.
That's right.
Hopefully her libido is large and things work well. But
she doesn't
then again,
have to. She doesn't have to, but okay.
Exactly.
Now let's go. Oh yeah, Susan Ehrlich, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to say the Bible also talks of Isaac fondling Rebecca.
That's right.
So I mean, there are graphic instances in the Bible, and I want to put to rest this the concept of women being property and chattel, and in particular, even you see current things unorthodox, and some of that holds true, but I have family who are Orthodox, and they went to great lengths to make sure that the young man and woman were compatible and the like, and they were the ones to determine. And one couple, they both felt they were soulmates. I think your soulmate concept is very much alive.
Well, I think, it says also in the Talmud, you cannot force a woman to marry a man that she does not want to.
Right.
It also says, so we know in marriage, there's a marriage contract, there's ketubah. The ketubah is a contract between the man and the woman that he takes the wife and he's supposed to support her and take care of her or whatever. And traditionally, a husband can divorce a wife. He has to give her back the ketubah in order to create the divorce. But it also says in the Talmud, if a man refuses to have sex with his wife, that are grounds for her to demand a divorce and get the ketubah back, which is a very rare instance.
You have to prove it.
I think if you're not, you probably have to prove it, but I'm sure there are ways to prove it. But you're right. I don't know about the courts. It says here in the Talmud, the view of the wife is the person should always be careful about the honor of his wife, for blessing is found in a person's home only due to his wife. And it also says, and I think I've read this before for my class, when a man buys his wife fine clothes and jewelry, he should have in mind that he's beautifying the Shekhinah, the divine presence, represented in this world by none other than his wife. So this is a Hasidic master, actually, Rabbi Yeshaya Horowitz, who says the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is manifest in the home by the wife. And so a man should buy his wife beautiful clothes and jewels to adorn her, because he's adorning an aspect of God. It also says a man should eat and drink less than his means, clothe himself according to his means, and honor his wife and children beyond his means. So there's this sense, again, of always putting the wife. Now, this is a wife. This is not, a girlfriend or a lover or whatever. This is under the canopy, the chuppah of marriage. And just to remind people who might not remember, one of the words for marriage is kiddushin, from kadosh, like kiddush or kaddish. So it's a holy act. Marriage is considered a sacred and holy act of uniting these two souls together. And there's an obligation of the woman keeps the home in the traditional marriage, though we know that women worked outside the home, even probably in ancient Israel, if they had to. All through the ages, women worked. Rashi studied his mother. I think his wife, I don't know about his wife, but his mother ran a huge vineyard, and they lived off that. She did the business, and Rashi was the scholar. So we know that women traditionally worked outside the home and just were not little homebodies. It also says in the Zohar, the Kabbalah, a husband and wife are one soul, separated only through their descent to this world. When they are married, they are reunited again. And so you have to take marriage very seriously, picking the right person and really examining.
Can you read that again, Suze? I didn't quite get it.
A husband and wife are one soul, separated only through their descent to this world. Remember, I said they're cut in half right before they're born. When their souls 40 days before are split, and when they are married, they are reunited again. In other words, it's your beshert. You find your beshert. Any films we see where young women are pressured into marriage are on the fringe, or that's not the Jewish way. It could be the custom of the sect or the Rebbe or whatever, because people, go off the deep end in all directions. But that's not what the law, the halacha, says about how a man and wife are married. You cannot pressure a girl into marriage. That is considered completely wrong. So now we talk about sex. What is sex? And Judaism says that sex is holy, sex is important, and that the reason for sex is not procreation. The Talmud says it's for pleasure. It's for pleasure, and it's very important to give each other pleasure. Well, let me see what they say. Okay. Also, in the Torah, it says a husband has to provide his wife with three things. What do you think those three things would be? Take a guess. What would those three things be that a husband has to provide his wife with?
Food, shelter,
and
sex.
And they say marital intimacy. Yes, he has to provide her those three things. Now, this is fantastic, because the Talmud, the great thing about the Talmud and the terrible thing about the Talmud is it goes into such detail you could jump off a cliff. It's just, but sometimes it's really entertaining. They have a detailed schedule for how many times a week or whatever a husband must give his wife sex, depending on his profession. So a man who is rich and independent is obliged to sleep with his wife every day. So if you're a rich man and you stay home, you have independent means. If she wants it, if she doesn't want it, but if she wants it every day. A camel driver once in every 30 days. A sailor once in 6 months. And a scholar, I read, it's not in here, but I read twice a week. A scholar, like a Torah scholar, twice a week. And a merchant once a week, because he's out, business and whatever. So, but you can reject your husband's advances, but you can't reject her advances if she wants to have sex. And then in the Shulchan Aruch, which is a detailed sort of compendium of all the laws, it says that the husband, before he approaches his wife, should take a bath. He should smell good. He should, if she's giving him these looks, he shouldn't wait for her to ask. He should oblige her and make her happy. And it's interesting that the rabbis believe that the woman needed to be satisfied in order to be a happy wife. A lot of times you think it's the husband has to be satisfied, but the woman needs to be satisfied. Of course, in Judaism, you're forbidden to have sex during menstruation. But interestingly, in the Torah, it's only during the time of menstruation. But then the rabbis said, no, we need to have longer than that. So it's usually at the 7 days of menstruation, or 5 to 7 days. But then the rabbis added another 7 days. So basically, you're not having sex with your husband half the month. And if you're starting from your period to the 15th day or 14th day, what is that?
Fertility.
It's fertility. It's the height of ovulation. And so that is why women had, Orthodox women have so many children. Now, interestingly enough, the rabbis don't like masturbation, and they don't like spilling your seed, like premature ejaculation, in order not to withdrawal, in order not to get a woman pregnant. However, there are no laws for the women. So she can use contraception. He can't spill his seed, but she can use contraception to prevent pregnancy, including even today, birth control pills or a diaphragm or whatever, it's acceptable.
Don't you have to go to the mikvah after you're done menstruating for
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
After the 15 days or 14 days, you have to go to the mikvah, and then you come home and you have sex with your husband that night. And during the time, and this is rabbinic, so this is where, like, in ancient Israel, there was nothing like this, but the rabbis, and it's interesting, they said, no, not only do you not have sex for, double the times, 14 days, but you're not allowed to touch each other. You can't sleep in the same bed for those 14 days. You can't even eat off of a plate, share a plate or anything together. So my niece, who's a Baal Tshuva, which means she returned to ultra-Orthodoxy, she sleeps in a separate bed from her husband half the month. The Orthodox will tell you that it just increases desire. That when you can't have your husband or your wife all the time at will, you're like waiting for the day, and it keeps the marriage very exciting. So my niece is not unhappy at all. And she says, I always feel so wonderful after I go to the mikveh and come home. So they know they have a date that night. So, you can look at it from either point of view. Any questions? Or Joni, did you want to say something?
Yes, is the mikveh opened on Shabbat?
No. Saturday night, it would be open.
Oh, okay.
It would be open Saturday night, yeah. After. A lot of women would go Saturday night. Yes, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Susan, what do you think is the underlying value system that's sitting here underneath all of this in terms of what message we're getting about sexuality from ancient Judaism? And is this sort of a carryover from all the other ancient cultures who—
Are you talking about menstruation?
Or, had this very positive attitude towards sex? Or is there something else going on here? Because it's such a break with Christianity. what's the historical
Well, I think sex,
story here?
according to what I read, sex was always considered holy and important and necessary as a part of marriage. And in fact, early Christian anti-Semitism depicted Jews as sex maniacs.
Yeah, I know.
And rapists and whatever, because their idea, the highest thing was celibacy, you know, and like the Virgin Mary and that whole idea, and ours was completely different. So I actually think, compared to the Canaanite and other ancient world fertility rites and cults, this was pretty conservative, because they had sacred prostitutes, which we even see in the Bible. Tamar was posing as a sacred prostitute. They had sex as part of their religious practice. You went to the temple and you slept with a sacred prostitute to help bring on fertility to the land, to bring the crops up.
Consistent with that. This attitude towards sex is consistent with an ancient attitude in the land at that time.
Except that they circumscribed it by saying only in marriage. You couldn't be a sacred prostitute. Though, come on, there were concubines. The ancient rabbi, world had concubines, and King David had concubines. King Saul had concubines, which are basically unmarried, women. Just to say, yes, Penina.
Okay. We have an incident in the book of Ruth that her mother-in-law told Ruth to go and lay by the legs of Boaz.
Right.
And he saw her and he loved her. So she was actually promoting the whole sexual ritual, whatever you want to call it, to actually become his wife.
That's right.
So she actually managed it. She actually engineered it, the mother-in-law. And Ruth followed, and she did that. That's one case. Then we have in the book of Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, it's not just a man who writes it. In the book, there is a psukim that a woman is saying, Dodi li vani lo, Dodi li vani lo. I am my husband. She is the one who starts it. She's the one who is initiating.
She is the one who initiates it. Absolutely. So there was a freedom of sexuality in ancient Israel that's very different from Hasidic sexuality today and for the last 200 years.
But not different from ancient other societies. I mean, it was consistent with other societies.
It probably was. And then I think you're right. But I think they promoted it, but they tried to control it, and they were always warning against idol worship. And part of idol worship was this rampant sexuality, this promiscuousness that they tried to circumscribe it within the culture. You're right. They could never have gotten away with the Hasidic view of sex in ancient Israel. People would have gone, protested and gone crazy. There's no way. That's not, our view or our lives. So you're right. It's part of a whole mentality. But there seems to be more respect.
The Hasidic view is more of a response to Christianity than they might ever assume.
Perhaps that's an interesting perspective. You could be right. Yes, Jeff.
Can I bring this forward a little bit to maybe more current thinking, in the sense of, if we ask people, what is the best element of a sexual relationship? I think many people would say it's not just the physical act, it's the pillow talk, it's the closeness, it's the physical and emotional and verbal communication that occurs in that bed. And one of the elements that I've read in years past is the example of your husband who has been laid off, who is acutely depressed, who has emotional problems due to stress. One of the requirements of a wife is to have frequent sex with him, to build him up emotionally during that act of sex through pillow talk and communication.
When you say requirements, you mean where? From whom?
I think it was just something I read. I can't really say it was
Not
a
a Jewish
midrash.
requirement, is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
more or less. But the idea is sex in human terms as a way to improve the emotional content of your life, both through the sex and through the support element that closeness can develop and support each partner.
Well, I want to respond
Depression
to
or
you.
whatever.
Yeah, I'll talk about this now. So Shmuley, I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it Boteach or Botich? Shmuley
Boteach.
Boteach. Shmuley Boteach wrote a book called Kosher Sex. And I did not read it, but I have an excerpt from it. And he talks about the difference between just great sex and kosher sex. And it goes to what Jeff is saying, because he says, great sex has you focused entirely on the body of your partner. Kosher sex has you bound with the soul of your lover. Great sex promotes physical exhilaration. Kosher sex leads to spiritual integration. Great sex satisfies a hormonal urge for sexual release. Kosher sex caters to a spiritual need for human fusion with another soul. So he's talking about the spiritual and emotional component. Great sex consists entirely of motions. Kosher sex consists of motions that elicit lasting emotions. Great sex is making friction. Kosher sex is making love. Great sex is measured when you're in bed together with your partner. Kosher sex is measured in the period thereafter when you are physically apart but emotionally close. And finally, two more. Great sex can be had even while all one's barriers and inhibitions are still up. Kosher sex is humans at their most vulnerable, when their defenses are down and their heart exposed. Great sex is the end to an encounter. Kosher sex is the beginning of a relationship. So
I'm glad he said it better than I did,
Yeah,
but
so
the
here's-
content is the same.
yeah, a contemporary rabbi and person, who's writing about the difference that, he's calling it kosher sex. You don't have to be Jewish, but it's this idea that there's an element of spirituality, of love, and of emotion, of giving, ahava meaning giving, as well as the physical pleasure. Talia, you wanted to say something?
That was terrific.
So the question that was posed, about The Bachelor and would rabbis approve, I was thinking about how the accountability, that it's in a public forum. It's not just two people meeting privately and making a decision alone. It's the village, it's the community, approving, making arrangements, and all of that. But I still can't, the whole idea of the relationship coming after, building after, because there's so many things to get to know about a person, right? And so if they're mentally unstable, wouldn't it be better to find out ahead of time before you're beaten or abused? And so it eliminates a lot of risk if you allow the people to meet as equals, as opposed to according to these laws that we know were written by men.
But what are you talking about? Because where does it say there has to be a rush to marriage, or there's no courtship, or that you don't get to know the person first? That's nowhere written. That may be the tradition, as I said, of this slice of antiquated Judaism, in my opinion. But in the Talmud or the Torah, there's no saying, you meet 3 times and you get married. There's none of that. Or the arranged marriage idea, a lot, I want to just say something about arranged marriage. How many people here have watched Indian Matchmaker? Okay, so in the Indian culture, and I remember when I went to rabbinical school, there, it was at the Hillel at UCLA, and there's a Starbucks there. There's this lovely Indian girl from UCLA. She was going to go to medical school. I said, I have a question. Are you gonna have an arranged marriage? This is like 5 years ago. And she said, probably, because my parents are gonna find somebody really fantastic, better than I could ever find. And sometimes these if you look today in modern Orthodox, the parents look at a resume of the guy, they check him out in every possible way, and they go, okay, you're good enough for my daughter to meet. They're not saying you have to marry, but even to meet. So sometimes the parents' involvement, certainly in a lot of the world, is a help. My daughter actually told me recently I could find someone for her because she's having terrible luck. So we have to look, no pressure, but sometimes the parents are willing to go out there and really do the best for their child. So it could go either way, really.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I talk for a minute? I've had my hand up.
Yeah, Miriam. I'm sorry, Miriam. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have different thoughts on these, and I'm not quite sure they're worth expressing, but I will. For one thing, anything that Judaism or the culture you're living in, or the assimilated culture you're living in, or keeping your customs among being a minority among the majority who are Christians in this country, and feeling very comfortable and very safe keeping your own customs. There can be an unlimited way for young people to meet each other. There are not enough ways to meet them. New York City has something I've always admired, not just because I'm from Brooklyn, but because every Friday afternoon, especially on lovely spring and summer days, there were these many, many tables on what they called the New York Seaport, right at the pier, where Wall Street is very close, so you can walk there, where the lawyers' buildings are very, very close. After work on Fridays, young people of any ages, 60-year-old young people, would go to the tables and sit down at a seat. And the tables were filled with people that did not know each other. But they ordered coffee and whatever, pre-dinner time. And it was a lovely thing that existed. Of course, it won't exist for several years from now, probably, where young people, any people, could meet each other in a legitimate form. I don't care if they meet on the street, and that nothing is illegitimate to me personally, as a young person myself, where 94, where people can and should meet each other in any way that they can. Judaism does not frown on this.
That's
Judaism
right.
looks up to it. And I think that some of the things the Hasidim are doing today are more orthodox than existed in ancient.
I
If
agree
you
with
put
you.
your hand out to a man, absolutely will not shake it. Doesn't mean to insult you, but he'll keep his hands in his pocket. He would not shake his mother-in-law's hand, only his wife and children. That's so new in Judaism.
I
So
agree
it's-
with you. I think ancient Israel was a lot freer. And even in rabbinic, Talmudic times, some of it was a lot freer. I wanted to just tell you, though, on the other side, wait, does anybody else want to say something that didn't get a chance?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi.
What is your opinion, or what is really the Reformed Jewish opinion of the practice of premarital shomer negia?
Okay. That's not reform at all. No, we
Right.
don't.
I'm asking what the reform perspective is of it.
It's okay. What he's talking about.
What is it?
It means that before
Touching.
you're married, you do not touch. Even your betrothed, you're engaged. Shomer negia means like you're observing, no touch. And my niece, the religious one who I told you about, and her husband, they at a certain point they said, we're doing this now. So we can't hug. Like my niece can't hug her cousins or her uncles, only her immediate family. And my nephew now will not hug or shake my hand, her husband, my nephew. The reason, well, there's the idea of modesty, but also the reason that the woman might be menstruating, and so she might be unclean, and you don't want to touch her if she's unclean. But Reform Judaism doesn't see that as an uncleanliness, and we don't see anything wrong with shaking hands or hugging or whatever. You see it in our temple all the time. Pre-COVID, we used to hug each other all the time. So it's not a practice that we follow or we condone, I would say. We don't agree with it, but that's the great thing about Judaism. There's so many ways. Yes, Penina.
Okay, there is such a thing that's called mar'it ayin.
Yes.
It's how it looks to the public.
Right.
So the hugging the other person, whether it's a mother-in-law or a sister-in-law, or it's not could be translated into a relationship. So it's lemar'it ayin, to avoid this, what people might think, they refrain from the whole
Right.
hugging.
But if you live your whole life worried about what people might think and you can't do anything natural or innocent.
I'm not saying that this is okay.
Yeah.
I'm saying that it exists.
Yes, it does.
It's called it's even in the Bible. And it says if you do something that it could be interpreted wrongly to be something that's not supposed to be happening, don't do it.
Right. And, it's much more in the Talmud.
Okay. So I had a plumber who was really, really orthodox. When he came to fix my sink, he told me, and I didn't know that, he said, leave the door open.
Leave the door open.
You know, for a minute there, I was startled and I thought, what's going on? And then I literally asked him. I said, is that because of mar'it ayin? He said, yeah. So the next time he had to come, I just automatically left the door open. I didn't wait for him to tell me. And that's it. If that's what the custom is, that's what I'm going to do.
We can respect it, but we don't necessarily have to follow it or be burdened by it. But the rabbis also say, if either the husband or the wife, this is really extreme, are thinking about somebody else when they're having sex with their spouse, it's considered adultery.
Oh my God.
Exactly.
There we go.
Yeah. If you're imagining someone else in your mind, either way, the wife or the husband, that's considered adultery. And it's a sin. I wanted to read you another thing. This was amazing. This is from a 13th century treatise about sex. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you're going to get the idea. When you and your wife engage in sexual union, do not behave lightheartedly and regard this as vain, idle, improper. And now he talks about foreplay. Therefore, first introduce her into the mood with gentle words that excite her emotion, appease her mind, and delight her with joy. Thus you unite your mind and intention with hers. Say to her words which in part arouse in her passion, closeness, love, will, and erotic desire, and in part evoke in her reverence for God, piety, and modesty. That's a hard task. Never impose yourself upon her, nor force her. For any sexual union without an abundance of passion, love, and will, it is without the divine presence. Do not quarrel with her, nor act violently whenever coitus is involved. The Talmud says, a lion ravishes and then eats and has no shame. So acts the brute. He hits and then cohabits and has no shame. Rather court and attract her to you first with gracious and seductive, as well as refined and gentle words, so that both your intentions be for the sake of God. Do not hurry in arousing passion. Prolong till she is ready and in a passionate mood. Approach her lovingly and passionately so that she reaches her orgasm first. This is in the 13th century, called Igeret HaKodesh. It's a holy tract by a rabbi. So we see that.
Can you mail that out to all the men of the congregation, please?
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
It's a great reminder, sure. Absolutely.
Yes. So, on the other hand, and they also said it's forbidden. Oh, this is great because there's this myth. It actually says in the Talmud, Rav Yosef taught that to be close bodily contact during sex is important, unlike the custom of the Persians, who perform their marital duties in clothes. In other words, you're not allowed to wear clothes and have sex. You have to take off all your clothes. This idea that Hasidim have sex through a hole in the sheet, that whole thing, which is a total myth, is wrong. You have to have body-to-body contact. And like the Persians, that's interesting. But then they also say, you're going to like this, Jeff, 3 things enfeeble a man's body: to eat standing, to drink standing, and to have marital intercourse in a standing position. It enfeebles you. You can't have sex.
So all the movies that we see where they're standing against a wall are not kosher.
That's going to enfeeble you. That's going to enfeeble you. So
only the men are enfeebled. The women are just raving about it.
That's right. Oh, this is also interesting. Yeah, it says he can't have sex while he's marital relations, thinking of another woman, nor may he initiate sex while drunk, out of spite or hatred, nor may he rape her or initiate sex while she is afraid. Nor may they have sex while either of them are about to be divorced. If they're about to be divorced, if he does any of these things, his children will not be proper citizens. They will be brazen, rebellious, and criminals. So that's what they said. If you have sex when you're angry or drunk or you're getting a divorce, all these things where there's really not that loving emotional bond, your children are going to be criminals. So that's.
Can we go back one step in this discussion to love itself?
Yes.
Let's look at female love and let's say male love and how it begins. Is it necessary to have this vast endocrine emotional response, this love at first sight emotional surge? Or are we talking about minor attraction and then learning more about the individual through time and through meetings, multiple choices? Women,
it could be both. I think it could be either.
Yes.
I think some people have a thunderbolt. I mean, my grandmother always used to tell me this story. She went to a party. She met my grandfather. He was standing at the door. He walked her home. She came in and she said to her sister, I met the man I'm going to marry. And she married him. And they were married for 50 years.
Happily?
Yeah, very. He was devoted to her. He was devoted to her.
Okay.
Yes, very happily married.
Can be.
That happens sometime. What?
I said it can be.
It can be. Then other people, you take time. You're wooed. You slowly, the more you learn about somebody, sexual attraction could be very quick, but that kind of.
That's on the male side at a greater quantity. I think that's, a greater side of the initial attractions. It's that first
let me ask
partnership.
And any other man who dares to speak, how are same-sex attractions?
Bunch of cowards.
Yeah. I'll talk about same-sex in 1 second. But
sorry, honey.
Is instant sexual attraction the same as love? I think that's a problem because a lot of times people, and men for sure, they say you're attracted in 7 seconds. In 7 seconds if you're a man, if you're sexually attracted. But isn't love something else? And even that Isaac story and Rebecca, he married her and then he loved her when he got to know her, because he didn't marry her as a stranger in that case. She was brought to him and he married her. So I do think love usually grows and develops as you get to know someone. And this giving, they talk about the more you give, the more you nurture love in yourself and the other person. The Talmud says that when you give, you also love more, as opposed to not just the person receiving loving more.
I also think that, love is how you express yourselves to each other. I mean, Arnie and I are married 49 years, and we don't walk around the house telling each other how much we love each other, especially during the pandemic when it's like we're sick of each other all day long. But it's like you can.
You mean you're not
love.
demanding sex every day, Merle? What is wrong with you?
And well,
you're right.
Disabled, so that's a problem. but it's like, I think it's how you express yourselves. Exactly. And how you express to each other.
And how you treat each other. How you treat
right.
each other.
And I don't think you wake up every morning necessarily thinking about, am I in love today? Or am I, there's a lot that's part of love. And it's how you live your life with one another.
One thing I loved about Israel when I lived in Israel is that I saw that in Israel, it's a custom for a husband to bring flowers to his wife every Shabbat. That I saw that a lot. And my brother, actually, he lived in Israel for a year, came back, and I think he did it for many years, brought flowers for Shabbat. And also that a lot of Israeli husbands tend to bring their wives coffee in bed. I noticed that. Yeah, you like that. I saw that a lot, that there were these little gestures, and I'm sure the women had their gestures too, but I guess because I was so impressed that men did that, these macho Israelis, that there's gestures of love. There's the way you treat, the way you think of someone or whatever. I mean, the rabbis are talking about all of that. And it's not what we talked about in the beginning. We're going to conclude now with, remember in the beginning, it's not just sex is an obligation and sex is a duty. Sex should be a uniting, bonding, connecting, important part of marriage and a relationship. Oh yeah. So I think it was Taya asked about same sex. Mm-hmm. Did you ask about it?
Yeah.
All I can say is that in the Tanakh, there's a debate, but I take this side about David and Jonathan.
This is the first time I'm using it. Let me just leave the meeting. It's an interesting meeting.
Okay. There's King David, and when he's young, he and Jonathan, the son of King Saul, developed this love. And it even says he loved him more than any woman. And people, will say it was like a bro love, it's just a friendship, but it could have been more. I mean, we don't really know, but they both had wives, but they loved each other, it says, more than any women. And it's possible that was a same-sex relationship in some way. They died Jonathan risked his life, went against his father to save David's life. And when Jonathan died, David grieved for a really long time. So, and we know in ancient Greece, men would be married and whatever, and also have same-sex relationships. So maybe they were bisexual or whatever, I don't know. But we know that there's a taboo against homosexuality in the book of Leviticus. It says it's a sin. But so are a bunch of other things sins, and it's just in a list with everything else. But contemporary Reform Judaism accepts same-sex relationships and we marry same-sex couples if you're both Jewish. We don't do intermarriage at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, but we do same-sex marriages. So things evolve, with time.
Splitting hairs.
What'd you say?
Yes,
splitting hairs.
Yeah, what?
Rabbi,
yes.
What's interesting is that so many evangelists and Christians and everybody, maybe Jews too, get so excited and so angry at, this was yesterday, not today, I hope, at homosexuality, calling it a sin, calling it an abomination, which uses those words in the Bible. Yet in the very same chapter in Leviticus and Vayikra, it says if you desecrate the Shabbat, you can be put to death.
That's right.
Uses those words. And nobody gets excited about that.
I
That
agree
doesn't
with
bother them one bit. Only the homosexuality does.
And also, some commentators say that homosexuality is really only in the context of religious homosexuality, like sacred prostitution, sacred same-sex cultic prostitution or something like that, as a kind of worship of the idols and not necessarily just male-female relationships. Though we know that the whole world was basically, it was a taboo in most cultures except ancient Greece, for thousands of years. So why should we be any different? And we've evolved, we've changed. So I hope you learned something about love and sex in Judaism. And if anyone wants any of these documents, I can email them to you. Just let me know and I'll send you the texts and all the quotes and things like that. Just let me know. And thank you so much. And go have a passionate day.
Susan, how can we write to you and give you our email address?
Just, snanus@wbtla.org. That's my email.
Thank you.
And I'll send you all of the texts if you'd like them. Okay, bye everyone. And Shabbat
Thank you for the whole series.
Happy Hanukkah next week.
Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be healthy. Hanukkah, everybody.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
You know what I'm afraid of? Miriam may be having more sex than I am.
Oh, of course.
You keep chasing him around, Miriam.
Fine, we're only married around thousands of years. My husband and I are so fortunate. I mean, really, I thank God every day. I wake up and there is this lovely man next to me. How can I complain about anything? I mean that, Jeff. I never complain. Here I am, driving my car, running around, walking every day. I'm caneless, I'm painless. How dare I complain?
It's a great blessing, Miriam. I know you thank God every day for those.
I do, and she's wonderful. She always says, "Sweetheart, you're welcome."
No wonder I keep using the wrong sexual appellation. Now I understand. I have a problem. It's always a he for me. I don't understand that.
Whenever I thank her, she always says, "Sweetheart, you don't have to every day. It's okay."
You sexy woman, you.
Anyhow, Jeff, you're a good man.
Thank you. I appreciate
And
that.
have a nice.
Not everybody thinks so, but at least you do. So
Well, only the people who know you don't think so. Everybody else
who
does.
know me is right.
Oh,
all right. No more abuse
I'm
from
not talking biblical. When I say no, I'm not talking biblical.
Have a good
Have a lovely
Hanukkah.
Shabbat there, and especially
You too.
you.